Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick and here with Bruce Fein for another Fine Points. Last week I contacted Bruce to see if he was available to do another Fine Points, and the specific issue I mentioned to him, and a lot has happened since I mentioned that specific issue. So there's really a lot to talk about. Was when I was watching clips of Teddy Cruz talk about the alleged breaches by Panama over the commercial agreement that exists between the U.S. and Panama with respect to access to the canal. I'm not an expert in these international treaties or international laws, but I'm always curious when I hear, because I listened to the arguments that Cruz presented, and they really didn't sound like arguments you'd present in a court of law. While he was pretending to make legal arguments, they were not really. It was more propaganda, and he knows better because he studied law at Harvard, was considered one of the top students, maybe the top student in his class. And I think for the for the benefit of the audience, I do know something about contracts because I've executed a lot of contracts, and basically when you have an agreement, I assume that when the U.S. Agreed to turn over the canal, the Panama Canal, to the Panamanian government during the Carter administration, that along with it, they signed the commercial agreement that detailed the use the United States had over the canal. Now, I mean, for the benefit again of the audience, and I know you know all these things, Bruce. So when you do these contracts, you make declarations. Everybody makes reps and warranties. And then there are a whole bunch of these clauses and other clauses in the terms and conditions and what are the obligations and responsibilities of each party. And then also there's what happens if there's a breach. And usually in most contracts, if there's a breach, there's a notification required. And when that notification is made, usually there's an opportunity to cure that breach before before you take other action. So usually you would contact the person, say, "Here's the breach," or the other party, cure it. And usually there's a contract stipulate a reasonable cure period. And if it's cured, you move forward. If it's not cured, then there's a dispute resolution process. So I'm not sure what the dispute resolution process is in the case of any disputes with respect to the treaty, commercial treaty between the U.S. and Panama over access to the canal. I would be surprised if basically the contract stipulated that the U.S. could declare breach unilaterally and there would be no cure period, and the U.S. would act as as judge and jury. There's also another aspect of most contracts are, if you have like terms and conditions, that have been breached. Basically, once the party to the contract has knowledge that there's a breach and they do nothing about that breach for a period of time, then basically they've waived the right to be able to. There's like a statute of limitations. If you've done something that's in violation of the contract, and I have now knowledge of it, and I do nothing with that knowledge for a period of time, I've basically, since you breached, I know you've breached, I've chosen to do nothing about it. After a period of time, I've done nothing about it. I've waived my right to take action against that breach that I've had knowledge of for a period of time that I've done nothing with. And why am I saying that? I'm saying with respect to whatever position the Chinese have had at that ports. I think they've been there for quite a few years. And it's hard for me to believe the U.S. did not have knowledge that the Chinese were operating certain ports. So to the extent that if China has been operating these ports, and they've been operating these ports for a number of years, and the U.S. has had knowledge of it and has done nothing about it, basically, in commercial contract law, that basically would be essentially the U.S. granting a waiver in case it is a breach, and I'm not sure it is a breach, but even if it is a breach, essentially the U.S., by having knowledge and doing nothing with that knowledge, has waived the right to do something with that fact pattern.
Yeah, so, that's called latches. It's called the defense of latches in contract law. But let me interject a couple of things here, Jeffrey, the background. Number one, China was operating, it has a concession that it operates at the ports. It's not operating the canal itself. And it was doing the same thing in Trump's first term. He didn't do anything. So that situation has not changed whatsoever. But the second element here is to understand the challenge that he's making to the Panamanians' sovereignty over the canal. That sovereignty was delivered to Panama in the 1977. There was one neutrality treaty, which has not been breached by a treaty. It'd be like the French saying, well, no, we did the Louisiana Purchase, and that was by a treaty in 1803 with Napoleon. But, we think you're doing things bad, so we're going to take back the Louisiana Purchase. And that's not how it works. When you surrender sovereignty, that's it, unless the other side decides to give it back. Now, they could add that, and that should be not under duress. But this all, I think, is reminiscent, Jeffrey, of a very, very tawdry element of our initial presence in Panama. It goes back to 1903. We wanted a Panama Canal for a whole host of trade and military reasons. However, at that time, Panama was part of Colombia. Colombia was not interested in issuing any kind of hegemony to the United States in its territory. So we fomented a rebellion from Panama, a secession, the same secession we fought against in the Civil War. We sent military troops there to make sure that Colombian troops could not come and retain or maintain sovereignty over Panama. Then, when we controlled all the Panamanians who were involved in the revolution, then we basically negotiated a treaty for ourselves, to build the canal. Certainly under duress. We had all the military power, we had all the money. So it was totally theft. And in fact, you may recall S.I. Hayakawa. He was a very famous or infamous senator from California who was taught at universities there. And when he was a senator, he said against the canal treaties, we stole it fair and square, so we should keep it. That was his term. He understood we stole it. So really, the sovereignty cession is really just ending the theft of the Panama Canal from 1903 on. And there is nothing that suggests that Panama is violating any provision. If there are, there's the International Court of Justice in The Hague. If there is a dispute between nations over interpretation or application of a treaty, you can go to the ICJ. The United States has not gone to the ICJ and said, oh, these Panama Canal treaties have been violated. Neutrality, and maybe discriminating against transit of U.S. ships opposed to other ships, nothing. This is just a sheer assertion of power for its own sake. And again, it's the lawlessness that has characterized the Trump regime really from day one of his inauguration. Let me give you another example. Today's newspapers, if they're accurate, the headline should be, President Trump proposes war crime against Gazans, forcibly relocating them to other countries they don't want to go to. That's a war crime under the Geneva Convention, Article 49, Convention 4. You can't forcibly dislocate civilian populations. And yet, he's so normalized lawlessness, it's not even a headline anymore. It says, well, what else is new? So it's very, very unfortunate the United States basically has taken world order back to the days of Thucydides, the strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. Law is out of the equation, and we are now leading the pack.
Yeah, I find this very, very troubling in the sense of, again, we were founded as a constitutional republic. One of the values that supposedly that are cherished by America is a process of rule of law and equal justice under law. So I don't know how many individuals would feel that they signed a deal with another third party. The other third party decided, that, you and I do a deal. I decide this deal is too beneficial for you and not sufficiently beneficial for me. You don't have nuclear weapons and I have nuclear weapons. And I go to you and I say, I'm going to annihilate you if you don't renegotiate the deal. I don't know if that's the basis under which people want our legal system to operate. So, we want everybody to go into, a court that's neutral, and we want we want the best arguments, the legal arguments, the facts to be of themselves, and the relative power position of one person over another person should be irrelevant when we are trying to resolve, disputes. And so if people are proud of us throwing our weight around, and basically making false accusations about a party, being in breach when they're not in breach, and then backing it up with basically, threatening to go either economic war, sanctions, or even, as Trump never ruled out, military actions, against either Greenland or Panama. So essentially, there's no dialogue. There's no using the dispute resolution process that's embedded in these agreements. Instead, you go straight to force. Is this what really America wants? Everybody wants in every dispute they have, forget about the courts. Let's just everybody get out their guns and start shooting each other, and the strongest, should survive, and we completely no longer have a rule of law society, but we embrace a society of rule of force, like the statement you made. Because really, if we accept that in the government, then the government is supposed to set, an example. And again, everybody should be equal under the law, including people in government. So to me, this is really, really horrible that we're rationalizing and justifying, and there's so much silence, on these issues that, basically everything we're doing, is a recourse initially to force.
Yeah. That's what it is. It's the threat. And I think, Jeffrey, we need to remember history too. In some sense, it's for our own safety that we need to celebrate the rule of law. We're not going to be the number one power forever. Britain thought it was, but it didn't happen. Every empire is going to find its sunset. That's an iron rule. If we want, to avoid being bullied by some other power, right now we don't think it's going to happen. Adolf Hitler never thought it was going to happen to him either. Neither did Napoleon nor Stalin or whatever. We need to entrench the rule of law because there's going to be a time when we're going to need it. And it's unfortunately most times people have not recognized that. I recur again to the Malian dialogue in Thucydides' history of the Peloponnesian War. The Athenians thought they were going to be the empire of the Aegean forever. So when the Malians said, we want to be neutral in a debate, you're going to need neutrality at one time. The Athenians said, no, we're going to be empire forever. Don't worry about it. And then ultimately they got crushed in their own wars. So I think we ought to do it because it's the right thing to do. But even if you don't, even if you're only worried about self-preservation, you should be terrified. If not for yourself, for your children, for your children's children. It's going to happen to us too if we throw the rule of law out the window, which is exactly what we're doing at present.
Yeah. Before moving to specific examples of things that have disgusted you this past week or so, I wanted to ask you a question. And I'm not accusing Trump as the only one who's abused this, because he's not unique in abusing executive orders. But it seems to me, president gets up there, holds his hand up, puts his hand on the Bible, swears to uphold, the Constitution. So now you're preparing an executive order. Your legal team is around you, and they're discussing the legality of this executive order. There could be several approaches to it. One is the legal team saying, this is just illegal and we can't sign this executive order and we don't want to write it. We don't think you should sign it. Or well, let's see if we can test the boundaries of the law. Even though we probably don't have a very good argument, but you never know. These are our buddies in the court, and they've already violated the Constitution and their claim to be public meaning originalists. So they've helped us in the past. They might help us in the future. So at the end of the day, they're making opinions not based upon the text of the Constitution. And maybe here they'll make another opinion that's not consistent with the text of the Constitution. So, but the point is, at the point that you're signing an executive order, it's probably not constitutional. So, is that a violation of somebody's oath of office if they're executing executive orders and basically they're just playing roulette with their executive orders, knowing that it's highly likely or very unlikely that it'll be deemed constitutional, highly likely it'll be deemed unconstitutional, and and still doing it anyway is and again, I'm saying Trump's not the only one who's played this game, but it seems
Jeffrey, I can comment upon this because I served in the Office of Legal Counsel for a couple of years, and in the Department of Justice, we wouldn't write executive orders that we thought, this is during the Nixon administration, were illegal. So no, you can't do this. That was our role. Our role wasn't to defend Nixon. Our role was to defend the Constitution of the United States. That's how it's supposed to operate. That's how it operated then. Then its role has changed. I've debated John Yoo, who was also in the Office of Legal Counsel under President George W. Bush. He said in a debate with me, my client is never wrong. I said, your client's the Constitution, not George W. Bush. He didn't believe that. His client was George W. Bush. And if you recall, Jeffrey, the argument that you made on the second, well, maybe the courts will uphold it. That was exactly the argument that John Eastman, a lawyer for Trump, trying to steal the 2020 election, he said, well, it really doesn't sound like the vice president can decide who won the 2020 election and not count the votes, but let's do it anyway. And when he's told, how many votes do you think you get in the Supreme Court? At first he thought maybe one, said, no, we're not going to get any votes there anyway. So that's the kind of lawlessness you get. If you're willing to say, well, maybe there's a chance, one chance in 100 or 1,000 that the Supreme Court will uphold us. So we'll just flout the law. In the interim, the whole case will fall into chaos. Lawlessness will prevail, if a court survives, and then they can issue their decision 3 or 4 years later. If that's the attitude, Jeffrey, the rule of law is over. That you can make that argument that because the Supreme Court can overturn any precedent in 230 years, as a lawyer, you can make any argument that has a patina of justification for it. And if that's how the executive branch operates, we might as well be living in a dictatorship. They do whatever they want. 3 or 4 years later, maybe a court will decide, but at that time we'll have guns in the street. That's where we're headed for right now.
Now, I don't know how much people really value rule of law. I mean, I think in their own personal circumstances on a micro basis, they want to feel that, they have the benefit of rule of law, that they're innocent until, proven guilty, that they have all, the Miranda rights, the due process, all the rights to make sure that prosecutors cannot abuse their rights. They value that applied to them personally, but they don't seem to extend that appreciation for the rights and apply it as a principle collectively, for the country. And because to me the evidence is that if people were engaged in clearly unconstitutional acts, which I think is not just unique to Trump, I think many presidents have done unconstitutional things, that we would have very different behavior from the president if the president thought there was a credible case that by breaching the Constitution, they'd get impeached. So exactly. And people don't demand that. So maybe people like, a strong president and a president with powers beyond the scope of what the Constitution contemplated a president. I mean, they want it as long as they like the president,
Yeah. The personality, It's the personalities, not the process. You're exactly right, Jeffrey. And you're absolutely correct about Congress here. When in the Constitutional Convention they are discussing the need for an impeachment against a president, Benjamin Franklin says, impeachment's the surrogate for tyrannicide. They understood tyrannicide. They understood Oliver Cromwell and Charles I, Caesar and Brutus and Cassius. Said, we don't want to go that route. We want to have a process, right? But Congress has got to do it. Congress can, because the judiciary doesn't interfere with impeachment. The executive has no role. They've thrown that away. But when I want to go back to process again, and this, I think, Jeffrey, you would agree with me, and I think it's because it applies to me too. There are many decisions made in favor of Mr. Trump in the last years. I disagreed with him. I wrote arguments saying I disagree with your opinion, but I accept the process. I never said, hey, we need to go out on the streets and say, oh, it was a witch hunt, he got bribed or anything like that. Include in New York, include in Mar-a-Lago, include January 6th, include Trump versus U.S. and Colorado versus Anderson. Listen, I thought there are many, half dozen or more important cases. I've never suggested ever, well, we just do the heck with the law. Let's just go get Mr. Trump and hang him up. He had his people say, hang Mike Pence. Nobody at the impeachment trials of Trump, even if he got acquitted because he didn't get 2/3, no one's saying, oh, well, we need to hang Mr. Trump. Anyway, listen, the process went forward. There weren't 2/3 for convictions, so he's off, right? He doesn't get impeached. So I think that should discredit the idea that you or me somehow have it out for Mr. Trump. We are faithful to the process, even when it doesn't rule in our favor. I remember a similar situation with O.J. Simpson. With a trial out there, the murders, I thought he was guilty, but the jury came back and said he's innocent. Well, okay, he's innocent. For that, I'm not going to throw out the process. We have human beings, so the process is going to misfunction from time to time. But the alternative of not sticking with the process is the law of the jungle, and that's really bad for everybody. So that's where we are. Now, you're asking, and I think you're correct. I think at least at present, Jeffrey, the American people don't care about process. As our guy is in there, that's okay. We'll just do it. I remember meeting with people in Congress right after Barack Obama won his first election against George W. Bush. And I said, gee, there are all these usurpations that happened under Bush and Cheney, privacy violation. You should at least pass resolutions saying Congress disagrees, at least to get the debate there. You know what they said, Jeffrey? All the members of Congress, Obama will give us all our power back. They said, really? He's going to do the right thing. He didn't. He even took Bush and Cheney positions to a new level. No, I cannot think of a single instance, certainly in United States history, where any president ever gave back power that had been asserted by his predecessor. Not once. This is a delusion to think there's going to be power. And if you think that Trump's successor is going to give back power, hey, you've been on marijuana or cocaine or something. It's not going to happen. They'll keep the power and say, all right, I'm not going to give it back, but trust me, I'm going to use it properly. Now, it takes my explanation for this phenomenon is that it takes a certain level of education to sit back and be calm and have an understanding that process counts. You got to look beyond the next 5 seconds to see the importance of process. And it takes a level of education to think, wait a minute, I got to think beyond tomorrow. What about the long term? How is this going to work out for me? To put process above personalities. I don't think our educational level anymore sustains that understanding. It's all it is, personalities one side or the other. And you're correct, Jeffrey, it's not just Trump. Whoever's there, it's the Biden, Kamala Harris, Trump, J.D. Vance, whoever it is before them, it's Clinton. And it's because we no longer have that respect and understanding of process anymore. When we did have process that worked well, even with mediocrities there. We had a span there where we had William Henry Harrison and Zachary Taylor, James K. Polk, Millard Fillmore, mediocrities on steroids. The system still worked generally, There's still Congress was dominant. There's still an understanding in the country that, we don't want an elected dictator. That's gone today. Maybe the reason why it's gone is because we have the ability that we didn't have at that time with all our nuclear forces, all our money, to be the bully and get away with it for a time. It's not going to last forever. So we figure, okay, here's our chance. It's an example of my theorem. The oppressed become the oppressors as soon as they get a chance. And as soon as we got a chance to replace Britain, who we fought against in 1776, okay, now your twilight is over. Now we're going to step in and we're going to be the empire. We're going to be the white man's burden and push forward. and we continue down that path, much to our peril.
Yeah, I think if we take a look at what we accomplished as a nation, as an individuals, in what individuals accomplished that made, I should say, what individuals accomplished that made them a great nation, because individuals did it, during the 19th century. During the 19th century, the government was very, very small. The federal government spent like 3% of GDP, so it did very, very little. People fended for themselves. And and despite us, suffering through the War of 1812, where Washington got burned, the Civil War, where millions died, and then we had to have the Reconstruction period, post the Civil War, with all those handicaps, the prosperity of America from 1800 to 1900 had no peer. In spite of both those things, and what accomplished this was a free people with a government that really didn't interfere with their lives, because their government was mostly local. It was not national, and even the local government, had a soft touch. So, the point I'm trying to make with this, going back to your comment about a string of mediocre presidents, an argument that I've made about how brilliant the founding generation was, is that we could have lousy presidents and the country still prospered. So the prosperity of the American people was not really linked to who occupied the White House. So we prospered. When the points of fragility, we had a civil war because we weren't able to really adequately resolve certain issues between the North and the South. Terrible tragedy, but we came back together. It was a high cost, and we continued to to prosper as a nation. And if we take a look at the 19th century, well, we say, okay, Washington was a great president. Jefferson might have been a great president. Madison a good president. Monroe an all right president. Some people like Andy Jackson. Then you go through the rest of the century and you say, well, there's Lincoln. And then you go from Lincoln to the end of the century, and people don't even know who the people were presidents after that. And why don't they know who they are? Because they were so inconsequential. I mean, some were consequential, like Polk, because he conquered a lot of territory. But ultimately, people don't know who James K. Polk is, or any of these people, because the history has deemed them, relatively inconsequential, unless you're a political scientist and you're a historian and you make a real effort to have this knowledge. So most Americans know who George Washington is, and Jefferson and Lincoln. And then if you ask them how many presidents they can name, from Lincoln to Wilson, my bet that most people would not be able to come up with one name. So they were pretty inconsequential. And yet during that period of time, America prospered. It was the Gilded Era. So we built the intercontinental trains. We had electricity. The prosperity that was created, the innovation in this country, was tremendous. And it never depended upon who occupied the White House.
Yeah, and I think on that score, Jeffrey, let me interject. You look at the inventors, the steamship and telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Edison. They're not DARPA. They're not government funded. They just did it on their own. The inventions, the patents, were the inspiration of private genius. You didn't have government bureaucrats deciding who's going to be the sunrise industry and sunset industry or whatever. Like now all the funding goes, it's the DARPA or, it's some government funding at all. Very few entrepreneurs just do it on their own. And despite there are certainly speed bumps in the road, but we soared past Great Britain and Germany and all other superpowers by the end of the century. But Jeffrey, that's where we came, I believe, to a crossroads, what you might call an inflection point. When we reach that level of power and economic strength because of the great things of separation of powers and the private sphere, we said, or the politicians said, Now's our chance. We don't have to be just private enterprise and celebrate liberty. What about celebrating domination and world power? We can rewrite the chapters of America and leave footprints in the sand of time by conquering other people and replacing Great Britain. That was the Faustian bargain that was at hand in 1900, really with William McKinley and the Philippines War, where we suppressed the right of self-determination, conquered it the other day. We said Guam and not only in the Philippines, Puerto Rico. And the culture basically said, well, if I got to choose between liberty and individual freedom and empire, let's choose empire. At least the politicians did, because they saw big government something in it for them. The American people, unfortunately, went along. They didn't really, because the politicians were enough to what you might call propagandize, fool them into thinking, it's better to be empire than to be prosperous and celebrate liberty. And since that time, ever since that time, we've always then subordinated the liberty, the private initiative, the private individual we celebrate in favor of national security, domination, some sort of another. Some year periods we were a little bit faster, some period less. Even under Calvin Coolidge, we were running after Cesar Sandino in Nicaragua. What in the heck were we there for? Calvin Coolidge is supposed to be the one who's restrained, right? Well, why are we trying to dominate Nicaragua? So it didn't, and part of this is because each president at least maintains all the powers inherited by the predecessor and then determines how much further they want to go. And we've continued since that time, really now over a century. And now we're basically off of the cliff. It is really, if the founding fathers came back today and looked at what's happening right today, they say, our country has been hijacked. It's defected to the enemy. It is unimaginable to think that the framers would be doing what the Trump administration or even the Biden administration before that's been done. Now, there's another element here I'd like to call attention to, and that is President Trump now has said, well, why don't we do a deal with Ukraine? Like mercenaries. You give us some of your metals, and we'll get involved in your war with Russia. Quid pro quo. Like, is that what we're about? Everything's a business transaction. There's no sense of rule of law and peace, and let other individuals prosper. You can imagine what other countries would do. I can imagine Saudi Arabia saying next, well, listen, here's some oil. We'll let you come in and you agree to defend us against any attack. Let us join NATO, or let's have a defense pact, so that despite the fact that we kill, Mr. Khashoggi because he's a journalist and criticizes us, and we kill people who are infidels and don't provide any religious freedom and basically suppress women. But heck, if we give you oil, will you come and defend us? In the name of what? Democracy, for sure, right? Because we're making the world safe for democracy everywhere.
No, don't forget that they also gave $2 billion to Jared Kushner.
Yeah, right. And the sovereign wealth fund that Trump wants to emulate now.
Yes.
This is the one thing in Washington, nothing looks as seen. Everything has an ulterior motive. Now, and that's the reason why you want.
I read an article. I don't know. I can't vouch for all the facts are accurate in the article, but from what the article read about the $2 billion that they gave Kushner is that MBS sent his due diligence team that does due diligence on all his investing, and so they did due diligence on the fund. They came back and they said, we strongly recommend you don't invest. And what did they analyze? They said, one is the fees were too high. Two, no experience. Three, they seemed not really to be capable of really, running that type of money. They had no track record. So they gave a whole bunch of examples, and they underwrote it like they'd write any other of the deals. And yet MBS went ahead and still, despite the negative report, on not to invest, and a lot of compelling reasons on why not to invest, they still invested. But of course, this had nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with influence peddling. So, and I'm sure MBS routinely sends his team of experts to do due diligence for him to just ignore them. So, and nobody thought that was worth investigating. Of course, it's worth investigating. Somebody going in saying, I want a gun permit, and I tell this false little statement about, that I haven't used, any type of illicit substance, for the recent period of time. And, that should be punishable for, an eternity in jail. And that's a horrible thing, because of course we know there's nobody else other than Hunter Biden that has ever filed a false statement on an application to the government. I'm sure no other human being on the planet has ever done that. And I'm sure every American believes that any little thing that they've made and misrepresentation, that they should spend 20 years in jail. And if it's a first offense and they cause no damage, I mean, he got a gun, he never committed a felony, with the use of the gun, so is this the society we want to live in? But that's a horrible thing. But going out and getting $2 billion, for probably influencing peddling with a foreign nation, maybe against American interests, that's a minor thing. Okay. That's not worth it. That's not worth investigating, and going back to the statement you made about the transactional nature. Yesterday I sent you, what the article I read, where in a press conference, Marco Rubio said when he was there in El Salvador, where they El Salvadorans generously offered to lease out at very attractive rates for them, that the United States could not only deport illegals there, but they could deport American citizens and have them in prison there in El Salvador. And what did Marco Rubio say? There are obvious legalities involved. We have a constitution, but it's a very generous offer. So maybe raise the price, and the hell with the legalities, and the hell with the Constitution. The fact that it's unconstitutional and illegal should be the end of the conversation. At that point in time, are we putting the Constitution up for sale? So,
or at least for rent. I just for the audience, Jeffrey, they should know there's a case called Trop versus Dulles in 1958. The Supreme Court held categorically you cannot deport an American citizen. Period. You can punish them for crimes, or you cannot deport. So now it's 75 years old, right on point. You just can't do it. You don't talk about it.
You didn't see the fine print. The fine print said it only applies, but if the price is right, who gives a damn? So this is what you're going back to the fact of the statement that you made, that this is a transactional administration. So rule of law is irrelevant if the transaction makes sense from their perspective of what makes it attractive, appealing. So again, should be an impeachable offense. I mean, you don't. Should a president be looking into ways that say, because that's what also Trump said. Trump also comment was, well, we know the Constitution kind of doesn't allow it, but we're still looking into it. So we're still looking to figure out a way, that we can do this.
To evade the Constitution.
We're figuring out a way how to deport, an elected member of Congress, Ilhan Omar. However, despicable many people might find her beliefs. She is a citizen. She is a member of Congress. She was chosen by her district more than once. And I guess we don't care about the choice that district made. So we want to disenfranchise that district. The same people said they were disenfranchised by a stolen election want to basically disenfranchise other districts because they don't like how those districts voted. And they're very happy disenfranchising people that vote in a way that they don't like, then deporting them. And what was the statement that she apparently made? She apparently made a statement saying, illegals, if you're stopped, you have rights, and you should learn what the law and the legal rights you have, that you have Fifth Amendment protections, and you should know that you have Fifth Amendment protections and that you should follow the law. And one congressman, a colleague of hers, Brandon Gill, apparently said, that she's breaking the law. I don't know what consequence he thought, and as a consequence of her breaking the law by saying what she said, and apparently what she said was giving legal advice that was accurate legal advice, to illegals, that is grounds for, deporting her. And then we can also deport people, and I'd like to see the type of list of people who they think qualify for, being deported because they're the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst, and that we should deport them into the most horrific conditions possible, because apparently, I guess we feel, that would, deter crime.
Just to show how Orwellian the situation is, Jeffrey, from that exchange about Ilan Ohan, the Congress recently passed, and Congress signed a bill that says that if you're an immigrant and you're arrested, not convicted, and it's pretty easy to get arrested for a series of crimes, there's no due process. You're out. You're deported. Somebody posted, well, wait a minute. And it was touted on, we're getting rid of all these criminals. Wait a minute. Until you have a trial, you're not a criminal. I thought there was a presumption of innocence. It's only about 5,000 years old, that you're not guilty until you're proven guilty. You're presumed innocent. And this is a tyrannical law. It means that it doesn't even mean, Jeffrey, that even if the arrest is illegal, they're deportable. Okay. And you can imagine Trump out there. Don't worry, I'll give you a pardon to anybody who arrests illegally aliens. You can get a pardon, but we can kick the aliens out. I mean, this is a monstrous law. There are ways, you can satisfy. Due process is not a suicide pact. There are reasonable measures put into all due process safeguards. And we're just blindly throwing those out without any knowledge that it's going to come back and haunt us. Sometime you're going to need it. And I'm going to repeat again, Pastor Niemöller, about the time of the Nazis, and he's in a concentration camp. And he said, first they came for the socialists, and I wasn't a socialist and said nothing. Then they came for the trade unionists. I wasn't a trade and said nothing. Then they came for the Jews. I wasn't a Jew and said nothing. Then they came for me, and there was no one else to speak for me. That's what you got to think about, So it's another example of Tom. I don't know anyone who's seen the play A Man for All Seasons, the law. What's going to happen when the devil turns on you after you've turned and destroyed all the forest that protects you with laws. There's going to be no place to hide. I don't want to sound like a professor, but this is reality. It's going to come back. And again, if it doesn't haunt us, it's going to haunt our future for sure.
Yeah, and I think the statement that you made is very accurate and should be a warning to everyone, is the fact that for those that like what Trump's doing today, and like the fact that he has these powers today, that typically what happens is that when one person expands power, that becomes the new floor on power, and then it just continues to grow. So, 4 years from now, it could be the other side wins from the perspective, and they'll take all the power Trump had, and they'll then add to that. And will the people who were happy with how Trump exercised the power, will they be equally happy with how, if Kamala is resurrected and wins in 2028? Not that I think that's likely, but just to give an example, will they be happy that Kamala has the same powers and even more, than Trump has today? So I would assume they would not. So this is not based upon any principle, again, except going back to, might makes right. And, and if we really, really believe that, then, one day we'll be the beneficiary of it, and the next day we will be the victim of it. And as you also pointed out, the day we're a victim of it and we're complaining about being a victim of it, we might have nobody to complain to, because everybody else might have been taken care of already. So we'll just be complaining to ourselves, and that won't be. So there'll be nobody there to listen to our complaints, and so it's very, very, very short-sighted.
Very short-sighted, and listen, I find it, it's the utter ingrate attitude. Look we had our ancestors. Now, they weren't perfect by any means, but they risked their lives to try to create a world that had more rather than less liberty, due process, unalienable rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. They survived at Valley Forge. They struggled. And we're just throwing away all of the liberties, the magnificent opportunities we have because of their sacrifices. I mean, can you be more of an ingrate to that? And what's our children going to say about us or our children's children? We squandered all their liberties so we could just be indifferent to our citizen responsibilities to hold the government to account. I mean, that's not, I don't want, I would hope that I would not be subject to that kind of stigma. But that's going to be deserved if we sit. We can see it in plain view. Jeffrey, let's talk about the deep state. It's not the deep state. You can see it every day. It's open, notorious. Nothing's hidden. We can see it happening. Trump himself said, July 23rd, 2019, then I have Article 2 where I have the right to do anything I want as president. There's nothing ambiguous about that statement. It sounds like King George III. No, I can do anything I want with the American colonists that I feel like. Provoked an American Revolution. Nothing happens, no pushback, zero. Well, I mean, I guess you get the government you deserve, and that's what we deserve if we sit in silence. We still have free speech rights. You can stand up, you can write, you can speak out, talk to your friends, talk to your children, go in, run for office, support other people who support the Constitution and process. It's not ended on that score. That we got to try. We just can't roll over and say we give up. It's too hard. Let somebody else do it. I mean, that's disrespectful for our ancestors who sacrificed much more than what I've just described. You have
what's the legal status of U.S. aid? I mean, this whole thing. I'm not going to be someone who says that whatever we spend in U.S. aid is. I don't believe in foreign aid. So for me, I would have shut down U.S. aid and I would shut down all foreign aid. Well, we know many of the people who embrace shutting this down for how they've allocated funds, are not necessarily opposed to foreign aid. So the problem is not foreign aid. I don't know why they've set an example of U.S. aid, because we give a lot of foreign aid. We give a lot of foreign aid to a lot of bad actors. We were delivering plane loads of cash into the people in Afghanistan, on like a weekly basis or something like that. So we funded a lot of bad things, and as a human being, I have to take a look at, we send these megaton bombs to Israel to annihilate, the Gazans, and that's a good use of foreign aid, and we send something for a DEI initiative, and that's a horrible thing. So somehow sending weapons over to kill other people is good, but in countries that have very oppressive regimes regarding how they treat certain groups, might not be as, quote, enlightened as, as we are. And put enlightened between quotation marks, because I'm being facetious. And I don't know, when people take a look at, the trade-off between one and the other, how you can come up with, it's okay for me to give money to people so they can kill other people unjustly, and that's okay, but we can't have any money going to DEI. I mean,
no, but the other, let me put it in a different way, Jeffrey, because some of the money cut off, we have unexploded ordnance all over many parts of the world, drop bombs, unexploded. So, and mines that are unexploded. So part of the money, foreign aid, was to try to demine, make the unexploded ordnance less lethal. People still dying or getting maimed in the hundreds. Okay, that's our ordnance. These are kids, not terrorists. Nope, that's not a quote humanitarian purpose within the meaning of the State Department. So we cut that off. Really, that's one where we are responsible for the hazard. We drop the darn stuff. We should not make it if somebody came into your home, Jeffrey, and had unexploded ordnance there, and you could trip over it and cause the whole home to explode and maim yourself, you'd figure, hey, you put it here, you come take it away, right? We said, nope, that's not humanitarian. Cut off that aid. Now, going back to the larger issue of USAID, where the State Department just said, okay, Marco Rubio is going to be the head of that, as well as the Secretary of State. I don't know how they get the authority to just take an agency that's been created by act of Congress and say it doesn't exist anymore. Now, I probably would oppose personally, if I'm in the Congress, a very large portion of what USAID does. But again, it's respecting the process. Even the worst criminal that I can see on TV, like Jack Ruby, killing Lee Harvey Oswald, we still give him a trial, right?
Yes.
We don't just take him up and lynch him. The process is important.
And I agree, and that's a point we are, like many points, in complete agreement with. I don't necessarily. I'm happy to see USAID shut down. It's got to be just shut down by the process that the law contemplates. It's shut down.
Yeah, and if you have an argument, go ahead. And remember, this isn't even an argument that Trump could make. Well, I can't go to Congress because the Democrats control it. It's a Republican Congress, and it's shown it's very anemic and unresistant to what you're asking. Why aren't you going to the Congress since you have majorities, even if they're slender? In my judgment, is because, listen, he doesn't want a president that says, hey, I ever have to ask anybody else what I want to do. Right. He and Musk have their entire lives. They've operated under whatever I want to do goes. That's it. Consultation has no value. Deliberation has no value. I'm the king. Go ahead and do it. And that's why even the smallest things, like on TikTok, you figure he couldn't get Congress to pass an amendment that says, okay, you have an extra 75 days to try to sell it. I mean, it would be remarkable if he couldn't get that extension. He doesn't even consider it for a second. He says, well, I picked out 75 days. Why do I want to have a precedent says I need to go to Congress for anything? And that betrays a mindset that, in my view, is so constitutionally dangerous. You got to get rid of that person.
Yeah. What if again, a Democrat wins in 2028 and they give access to it and they give that access to, they set up another doggy group and George Soros is in charge, and George Soros says, I want to look at the payment systems. I want to look at voter rolls. I want to look at districts that are red districts, and I don't want to send them any money. So I'm going to shut off sending money to all these districts of people who in those jurisdictions, we lost big in. So, this seems to be the type of mentality we're seeing now, in this administration. And I wonder if the people who are celebrating it today would be celebrating it if the shoe was if the shoe was on the other foot. So that's
and let's go to particulars, Jeffrey, on that score. We already have the so-called purge of government officials, FBI, Justice Department, people who are doing their jobs. It ultimately led to pardons or acquittals, non-prosecutions against Trump and some of his assistants, all relating in some way to January 6th. Okay. You're coming in and fire them all because, they were undertaking pursuant to law and they got many victories until the election. It looked like there could have been convictions as they're in New York, and suddenly they're all purged. I mean, my view is that it's a violation of free speech rights and free association at the non-policy making level, other than the cabinet and sub-cabinet level. And that's a decision of the U.S. Supreme Court. Elrod against Burns said we don't have a patronage system, except at the very, very top levels in the United States, because we're not going to make government employment dependent upon you satisfying a political litmus test. And that's what's clearly going on here with the FBI. There's some outstanding lawsuits. But anyway, turn the tables. Okay, suppose now you have a Democrat who wins in 2028. Okay, anybody who has any association with Elon Musk, we're going to go after, going to stick him in jail. Anybody who worked, under Pam Bondi in the Justice Department, the U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia, who's looking at people who were unkind to the Dogie people, and we're all going to turn the government against them. I mean, at that point, who's ever going to want to even serve in government? Say, the best and the brightest will leave. I'm just risking a criminality here. And then it's just going to be a cycle of recrimination. And the whole system.
I'll give you another example from a case that's going on right now. FCC, this new chairperson of the FCC, is now investigating certain networks for supposedly biased coverage. So they're going to study. They're going to go through. They went through and they got the full manuscript for Kamala interview on 60 Minutes and all the media, to see whether it displayed any bias in its reporting. Okay, notice, they're not going to X
Fox.
and saying, can you show me the algorithms? Because I want to make sure that your algorithms were politically neutral. Okay. So is there any conversation? I want to go to Fox, OANN, Newsmax, and I want to make sure, that every story you reported was politically neutral. Is there any effort to do that, or is this just going after people that are non-neutral towards the or perceived as being non-neutral towards the other party, but apparently everybody on their side is neutral and has behaved in good faith and has treated Democrats equally to treat how they treated Republicans. So people celebrate this stuff. So if they're going to set a principle, which I think is a terrible principle, because we have a competitive marketplace for information, and if there's a place that's biased, everybody knows how the biases of the various networks. People know the bias of NPR, NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox. I mean, the biases are all fairly obvious, and you have to be a moron to not understand, the biases, yet people are choosing certain biases because those biases reflect the biases of the people who are consuming content from those locations. But we have a lot of choice. It's not like we have an absence of choice. We have lots of choice. We have more choices than we know what to do with. So let the marketplace sort this out. But he's not taking a principled position of saying, I'm going to go and take a look at every media channel, and I want to make sure that all of them are completely neutral in how they report everything.
Yeah.
So,
and the other thing that's ironic, Jeffrey, and I can tell you this because I was at one time as general counsel of the Federal Communications Commission. I've been in the justice, but I've served in government perhaps totally 15 years more than I figured. Yeah, I saw the corruption. I didn't want to be involved anymore. The idea that government is neutral about anything is preposterous. Every conversation begins with, okay, how can we benefit politically this way or that? That's it. That's the mindset of those in politics. Their intellectual universe doesn't go outside of, hey, is this going to hurt us or help us politically? And the FCC is no different. Now, one of the reasons why it explains, I think, why Carr picked on CBS is because CBS needs the FCC approval to engage in a certain merger acquisition. Okay, so they're going to need licenses transferred. Yeah, so he can extort them. Yeah, that's why he felt the other ones. And if he tried it with someone else, they'd raise First Amendment issues immediately and probably shut the whole thing down as government censorship. But he knows he's got leverage. He's extorting this. And of course, unfortunately, because the journalistic standard anymore is, hey, as long as it's good for the bottom line, I don't care how much it violates free speech or the good of the country, we'll go ahead and do it. I think I remember somebody at CBS who was very high up during the Trump first campaign. He said, well, about the outlandish statements and the high profile that Trump was receiving by the media, free media. CBS said, well, it may not be good for the country, but it's great for the CBS's bottom line. Really? That's what you're thinking about? Sell the country out because you want a few extra profits. It's not like they're in the poorhouse. It's not like Jean Valjean stealing some bread because he needs it in order to survive. These are people who are already living in palaces, but we still have to get more. The heck with the country. We can't survive with that kind of attitude. It's just not. And we never would have won this Revolutionary War with that attitude. Nobody making any sacrifices for the public good whatsoever.
Yeah, so this is and people and people are silenced on this. There seems to be, people are not alarmed at the fact that how many people have decided to stay silent because they have fear of retribution. Yeah. That we're engaging in a significant amount of either preference falsification in order to avoid retribution, or silence is golden, because if you're critical, there's a cost associated with being. How could we sit back and say we value free speech if people are worried about, while they're exercising free speech, there'll be a negative consequence associated from the government for expressing a speech that that people in government don't like, and that they have the fear of retribution. And the people, from some of the articles I read in, MAGA, sources, is they're happy with this. They like the retribution to the people, and I guess they feel that part of it is just because they think that every investigation of Trump, was a witch hunt. That he really didn't incite violence. He only incited love. And it was a love-in at January.
Now, Jeffrey, let me interject there. I was around at Woodstock in 1969. I said January 6th was no Woodstock. See there, and that's what they're trying to suggest. Oh yeah, it was like a vacation and outing. It wasn't quite as outre as Woodstock. Maybe they didn't have the hippies, but everything else was the same. I mean, that's why the word Orwellian comes to mind here. This is what you'd expect to read George Orwell's 1984.
Yeah, so it's very. What are the other things that have most troubled you in the first couple of weeks of the Trump administration?
Well, again, it's the attitude that we know, and you broached it earlier in the hypothetical. Yeah, it's illegal, but we're going to do it anyway and try to stop us afterwards. They don't have any, and the other thing that's also, I think, very troubling is Congress is just a spectator here. Let's assume, and I assume that it is accurate, that Elon Musk has been able to identify a lot of fraud or waste, in the government. Fine, nothing wrong with that. The job of Congress is to go ahead and oversee it and eliminate it. Why isn't Elon Musk reporting to Congress? They're the ones with the power of the purse. It's there in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 11, Clause 7, I believe. And that's why they have the Impoundment Control Act. Why aren't they going back? We need this rescind. We need these deferrals. There are procedures in the Impoundment Control Act, so we don't waste money. It's nothing. It says, hey, who cares? The Congress is out of the Constitution. It's in Article 1. It's kind of disappeared. And so it means really, Jeffrey, that, and the courts have a little speed bump, but if we aren't screaming and yelling, and at least there's no self-restraint on Congress, do your job. You're doing nothing. You just rubber stamp. It's like the parliament under Mussolini and Adolf Hitler, rubber stamped everything. No oversight, no questions, nothing. We can't survive this way. That's what's most appalling. And we know that Trump isn't going to Congress because he feels, why should I set a precedent? I don't have to. Why the deliberative powers? There's certainly some things that he's identified that need correcting, but we have a process to correct it. It's the same way why, if we see somebody who commit a crime, we still have due process to get a trial. Maybe we got it wrong. We don't just have vigilante justice. And we have totally forgotten that. Okay, if it looks bad, it doesn't matter whether you need to cut corners, commit crimes in order to correct it. That's okay. Don't worry, it won't come back to haunt us. It will come back to haunt us, and probably sooner rather than later. That's what is truly appalling. And now they have, Elon Musk operating out of the White House. He gets access to things that under the Privacy Act should remain only with the Treasury Department. He doesn't belong to any department whatsoever. Who knows what he's going to use this for? And the other thing, even though it hasn't got as much publicity, we have Trump now in favor of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Now, if you think government is operating the Sovereign Wealth Fund, you don't think it's going to use that to favor its friends and punish its enemies, then you've been you've been hibernating for the last 50 centuries. Of course, it's going to be used that way. Just like the Sovereign Wealth Fund in Saudi Arabia being used to court the friends of MBS, right? And the Sovereign Wealth Funds will take corruption to a new level. And where's the push? This is literally insane. The government's going to have a $1 trillion slush fund to invest in. They're already talking about invest, in AI and investing COVID vaccines or whatever. You can see them wanting, some vaccines like COVID-19. Hey, don't worry. Why do we want to cure it? We're making lots of profits, off of selling the vaccines to our patients. Why do we really want to cure it? It has all the most horrible incentives you can imagine. That's be an outrage. I want to go back again to a point you made, Jeffrey, and that is the standard for impeachment. And we need to remember that impeachment is not criminal punishment. If you impeach, it just means you're removed from office. That's all. We can't trust you with our liberties. It's like in your business world, Jeffrey. Okay, you don't trust the CEO. They're mismanaging it. They're creating dangers. Okay, you get rid of the CEO. He doesn't go to Siberia. He loses his job. Okay, find another job. And the standard for impeachment was expressed by George Mason at the convention, a constitutional convention. Attempts to subvert the Constitution. And notice the word he said, attempt. You didn't have to succeed. But if there was a clear and present danger that you were going to try to subvert the Constitution, you're gone. We give it to somebody else. You can go to Mar-a-Lago. You can go to wherever else you want to go. We're not trying to harass you. We're not putting you in prison. But no, we're not trusting you with our liberties in the operation of government. And this idea that suddenly, impeachment is like the guillotine in the French Revolution that you read about in Tale of Two Cities. That's absurd, a complete absurdity. Impeachment is very, very, very civilized. We've had a half dozen or more judges who were impeached, convicted, they relieved. Most people don't even know who they are, but they didn't go to the graveyard. Okay, we couldn't trust you with the reins of judicial power anymore. You accept bribes, you did things that were unseemly, that kind of thing. So we need to get away from this idea, and it's prevalent even the far back. It's the banana republic. If you impeach, remove people. No, it's not whatsoever. And just think about this: if you impeach Joe Biden, who would you get? Kamala Harris. It's not a revolution. Still have a Democrat there. If you impeached at present Mr. Trump, who would you get? J.D. Vance. He's not code pink. He's still a Democrat, right? And then so that it's not like we're revolutionizing and overturning in some sense the outcome of the presidential election. You have a different person there, but the same party is in power. So the other thing I want to underscore, people think, well, all these impeachable offenses, and I've accounted like 175 since James K. Polk by presidents alone. You take one impeachment, you get the president convicted or removed, there'll never be another impeachable offense. You have to set the standard in a deterrence. They're not going to go ahead and do it. They love power too much. So it's not going to mean that, we're going to have impeaching all these presidents because they all do the X, Y, Z. They won't do it if you actually suffer a penalty for it. The problem we have now, they keep pushing the envelope. There's no pushback. So why should they comply with the Constitution?
Exactly. They seem to understand the incentives when it comes to crime of sending people, deporting American citizens who commit certain types of crimes and send them to the worst prison experience in the world that they can find, and say, well, if people are worried about that type of threat, they would reconsider whether they, would commit the crime. The same thing true with a president usurping authority beyond what the Constitution contemplated, the president should have. That if, as you just said, if they were impeached, an example of one or two impeached, that basically would change the behavior of every other president if they thought a threat of impeachment was a credible threat. And now, the founders basically said, look, we elect the president for 4 years, but if you get a bad actor, the point is not, there's a remedy. If you get somebody who you hope is, a virtuous person, who's a decent, virtuous, wise person occupying the White House, then 4 years from now we have another election. But if they're not virtuous, if they're criminal, if they don't reflect the values that we think, a virtuous society should have, that respects a sovereign individual, you don't have to wait the 4 years. You've elected people close to you who are accountable to you every 2 years. And so you don't have to wait that time. You get rid of that person. And if they don't do the job, then you get rid of the people who were elected to do that job. You'll get rid of other people who will do the job. I mean, that's the structure. And that's the structure because they thought that was the way of checking the president. What people don't know, these people wanted to check too much power in any one body. Okay, that's what they wanted to prevent, and they built all these things. They said, okay, we don't want fiat by judges doing judicial fiat. and things like that. So we build, all these remedies. We can impeach judges. We can impeach, we can impeach the president. So we build all these safeguards in the system, and we let the process start with the branch of the legislature that's closest to the people, so the people can check. So the people have the power, if they use it, to check any abuse of power. You can check it in the House, because you can every 2 years you can vote them in or out, and then the House can check the Senate, who's there, for 6 years. The House can be part of the process of checking the president, and in bringing impeachment trials against judges and the president. So, and if you want to change the system, we have an amendment process. So all this stuff was designed to say we have a process under which the people, we always need the consent of the people, okay?
Yeah.
And that now it seems like the people have abrogated their responsibility of, giving consent, that they, vote for somebody, they sit home and don't do anything to, preserve and protect, their freedoms and liberties, and while the people think the institution of the Congress really is horrible, and they have a very low opinion, they still on a local basis they keep choosing the people that they've chosen, because apparently everyone else's congressperson is bad except for theirs.
Yeah. Let me point out, Jeffrey, there are at least 14 provisions in the Constitution that seek to reinforce checks and balances by doing what? By blocking pure majorities. The Senate, the House, 2 years, 6 years, only 1/3 of the Senate, qualified veto where the president's not absolute. We have the Senate confirmation of presidential appointees, 2/3 votes to override, 2/3 required to ratify treaties. Anyway, there are 14 provisions. This idea that where it was just, no, we just have simple majority rule, and therefore if Trump got a mandate, he should be able to run roughshod over the Constitution. No. 14 provisions said, the framers said, no, we want to encourage a deliberative process, get concurrent consensus among different factions. So we have a huge consensus before we move forward to do anything. Now, does that mean in some instances you're going to have what is derogatorily said to be gridlock? Yeah, but they thought gridlock was better than the option. The cure of gridlock is dictatorship, right? You want any gridlock? Hey, just give a dictator, does whatever they want. But they understood the cure is so much worse than the disease. We'll stick with the disease. It's not perfect. And we saw it wasn't perfect in some sense in the civil rights. We had James Eastland were blocking all sorts of civil rights legislation, truly racist. It ultimately worked out, though. We stuck with the process and it worked. Okay. It had a lot of pain, but it's better than just saying the heck with the process, Just have a dictator, issue a decree. That's the end of it. Go back again. Even someone, the issue of slavery, which of course is a very, very important. It's a fundamental civil right. You have a right to your own labor. Unrequited bondage was 200 some years we took from the blacks. But even Lincoln, when he issued his Emancipation Proclamation as a war measure to free slaves in the states that were in rebellion, he still understood to end slavery, I need an amendment. It's called the 13th Amendment. He did the process. He got the amendment ratified, and that was the end of slavery. Of course, there was peonage or whatever, because after Reconstruction, there were illegalities that were unredressed under the 15th Amendment right to franchise. But anyway, Lincoln understood process. I can't do this on their own. Even something as horrible as slavery, you couldn't say, I just can't issue a decree and end it. I have to go through the process. That is where we have totally lost that understanding of our birth certificate, the U.S. Constitution. It's not taught anymore, no civics. The members of Congress don't understand it. President Trump doesn't understand it. J.D. Vance. These are people who graduated at Yale, Harvard, Stanford, whatever, right? Where are they? I remember it reminds me of, and Harvard's been perhaps the worst culprit of this. During World War II, John McCloy, Harvard graduate, Assistant Secretary of War, Francis Biddle, Harvard graduate, Attorney General. Well, what are we going to do about these Japanese Americans? They haven't committed any crimes. Well, this is their words. Well, the Constitution's a scrap of paper to me. If that's the only way we can lock up illegally Japs, That's Harvard. Those are the Harvard law graduates. It's amazing. So, and part of it say the educational system does not inculcate ethics. It does not inculcate a standard of understanding process that's more important than winning for your client. And that's where we're coming to. We're finding it now in spades. It hasn't been all in one leap. So it's incremental. Each president gets a little bit worse, because as you were saying, Jeffrey, no president gives back power. Every president sets a floor. The next president builds on that power. The only people who have an interest in taking the power back is you and me. We're the guardrail, the citizens of the United States. If we don't ask and demand it be taken back, it's going to stay there because no president has any incentive to give back power.
And what does it say about us as a people that, we have a president that says, I'm going to use force to get back the Panama Canal. I'm going to use force because it's convenient for me, it's convenient for the world that I own Greenland. And not only that, I'm going to go in, I'm going to take over Gaza, okay? And I'm going to be the deporter in chief of Gaza by deporting Gazans to countries,
Egypt and Jordan,
countries they have no linkage to. I mean, Gazans, what's their real linkage of Gazans to Saudi Arabia? What's the linkage between them? They're Arab countries. I mean, outside of that seems kind of racist. I mean, to me, of saying, well, I'll put them into, Egypt. I can kind of understand because Gaza was part of Egypt, but Egyptians, when they negotiated in Camp David, they made it clear, we're not going to sign a peace treaty where you return Gaza to us. If you want peace with us, the price you pay for peace, one of the prices you pay for peace is you keep Gaza. We don't want it. So Egypt had an opportunity of getting Gaza back, and they said no to that. So,
Jeffrey, just think of this in terms of the Arab context. Should we say, okay, Americans, somebody comes to America and says, well, you're white like the UK, or so we're going to take you. How about getting shipped to Manchester? How about getting shipped to Bath or whatever in England? Don't worry. Well, listen, you speak the same language. Well, you really shouldn't be concerned about disrupting your life. Really? I mean, you'd say that person was a madman. Of course, it's a huge disruption in your life. And that's and again, it's treating Palestinians as non-people. Really, is what it is. It really is quite disgraceful. And you said, how can America support? That's the image you want? It reminds me, Jeffrey, of a book you may recall in the 1950s called The Ugly American. That's again, we went abroad and we were trying to say we're the new chosen people. We're angelic. All the communists are bad, but we're really good. Occasionally we overthrow Iranian government. Occasionally we overthrow Guatemalan, but really it's all for their good. Covert action everywhere. We try to assassinate Castro and half a dozen members, chiefs in Africa. But hey, we're really, really, really good. And that's who we are. We're the ugly American. I've worked on a lawsuit now. It's pending against Secretary of State for authorizing shipments that shouldn't be going to Israel because they're in violation of humanitarian aid provisions of Congress, which they could be changed but haven't. And I've encountered an unusually large number of observations from Palestinians. Some live here, some in West Bank or Gaza. And they say, Bruce, we never really hated America. We always had kindly feelings toward America, even when they were supporting Israel, Six-Day War, even the intifadas. But this time when we see our children killed by weapons that say made in USA and see what's happened, the genocide, we pushed them too far. And now they've written the United States off. That's how ugly it is. They see their babies being killed in incubators. They have no food, starvation. They've just been displaced 8 times, in 3 weeks or whatever, with our assistance. So I'm saying and I'm sure the situation in Gaza, you can multiply elsewhere because unfortunately it's not only in Gaza where we're going in and bullying and with weapons and force and saying we're doing great things and angelic things that you should welcome us. And it's not good to have other people hate you and feel that you have disgraced your own escutcheon that celebrates in the Statue of Liberty. Give me your poor, your masses yearning to breathe free. We basically desecrated defile the Statue of Liberty with what we're doing.
But what does it say about us as a people, how so many people are silent on this?
Yeah.
What kind of people are we?
Yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, it's really, self-government requires a certain level of citizen activism, if you will. Government by the consent of the government. You have to be out there, do something. It's not a spectator sport, and expect the government to do something for you. And I think it's really quite a sad commentary.
How many elected members, especially on the Republican side, the Democrats are the opposition, but aren't there any Republicans out there willing to say this is insane? We're not going to reward. We did not arm Israel, to basically ethnically cleanse Gaza. I mean, we're now co-conspirators in ethnically cleansing. We keep telling people no borders, no country, no borders, no country. Yet we arm other people to ignore somebody's borders in their country, and we let them be ethnically cleansed, and then we want to move them out against their will, while we want our borders to be while we don't want to while we're calling a few people that come across the border as invaders. And I mean, it's kind of a weird definition of what's an invader. Okay, Israel is not an invader of Gaza. Okay, but these people crossing the border to the U.S., individuals unarmed, not acting in concert, looking for jobs. They're an existential threat to the country, and they're invaders. But what Israel did to Gaza is not, and I'm Jewish. I'm proud of being a Jew, but I'm not proud of. I will not support Israel when God said, to the extent that for people who believe the Bible, that here's some land for you. Your commitment, your contract with me is to be a light unto the world. So that's the contract. I remember years ago a rabbi telling me this story. He said, Jeff, and when I was getting ready for my bar mitzvah, he said, I want you to understand, so you understand what chosenness means when we say, we're a chosen people. It doesn't mean we're better people. And he said, this is how you should think about being chosen. God, in the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, the many call the Old Testament, there's the 10 Commandments. So people who have believed that the Old Testament has some authority to it, and Muslims and Christians believe in that the Old Testament has some value, and since it's the roots and the foundation for all the monotheistic religions, where they tell the story, it says, God went to all these people because in Judaism you have not 10 commandments, there are 613 commandments.
Mitzvahs, they call it.
Yeah, mitzvahs. Exactly. So you have 600. So God went around to a bunch of people and he said, okay, I wrote this book, 10 commandments. Actually, you can ignore me and you can follow the Noahide law, which is only 7 commandments, but I got another list, 613. Okay. So why don't you come and you'll be a preferred with me if you accept these 613. And everybody said no. So finally, by the time God got to the Jews, God didn't give the Jews a choice. God already learned that if he gave people a choice, they were not going to take the deal. So he just said, this 613 is an obligation that you have. Not everybody else has it, but you have it. But that doesn't make you special. Okay. I chose you to have these obligations. I didn't say you're a chosen people, that you're better than anyone else. All you have is 613 obligations, rather than some people that have 10 and other people have 7. You have 613. So this chosenness was never a sense of I'm special, I'm privileged, I'm closer to God, or any concept of light, and we made a pact with God, which was, we're supposed to be a light into other nations. We're supposed to spread a series of values and virtues, that are independent of whether you believe in God or not.
Yeah. So, and Jeffrey, I have to interject here. You read Deuteronomy. One of the recurring themes in the Old Testament, the Torah, is be kind to strangers and foreigners. He says,
Right.
as I took you out of Egypt, right? It's very emphasized in Deuteronomy. So is that what is happening in Gaza and the West Bank? The Jews are being kind and generous towards the foreigners and strangers. Is another way of the parable of the Good Samaritan. They're running contrary to the Torah.
Yes. And I think I'm glad you're involved. Look, because I do think you know I think this is a crime against humanity, and I think we've made ourselves co-conspirators in the crime against humanity because we support now the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, and we're arming Israel to abet its effort to ethnically cleanse. So shame on Israel and shame on us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we say, listen, this idea that if you criticize, well, you're unpatriotic. No, if I didn't care, I'd be silent and say, well, who cares? Like the reason why you criticize is you want to make it better. You want to make your country better.
Exactly.
If you're silent, no, you're the one who deserves condemnation for letting these things that need to be redressed go without any recognition whatsoever. The highest patriotism is to criticize when it's warranted. Use your brains, have a principled approach to it, not criticizing because it's a Republican or Democrat, you have any ulterior motive. It's the wrong thing to do. I mean, what do we have? Commandment 1, no, thou shalt not kill. Is that commandment being followed in Gaza West? It's a pretty simple one to understand, really. Some of the others may be more difficult. Is that what we see? The first commandment being honored in Gaza? Say babies being, when you have babies who get death certificates before birth certificates, something's a problem.
Very well said. So, Bruce, how would you like to wrap up this time that we had together? And again, thank you for this conversation.
Well, number one, I'd just like to reiterate what we both said. We always encourage everybody who watches this, please be active. The reason why we have government by the consent of the governed is to recognize that it's the governed who really are the ones who are going to set the rules that the people who exercise government power abide by. And it's not self-executing. It means responsibilities to be active. You don't have to run for office every day, but it means knowing what's going on. And it means spending time, maybe not on TikTok, not watching the Super Bowl, not wasting time on what I call childish amusements, because they're serious things. It's not to be puritanical for the sake of being puritanical. It's just horrible things going to happen if you don't do this. It's not to be punitive. And the second thing is, I believe, recognize that it isn't a Trump, a Biden, a Harris issue. It's longstanding, and we need to go after it without thinking that, if we get rid of X or Y, all things will go back again. We have to focus on the institutions, the due process, the separation of powers, the checks and balances, and we criticize anybody who wants to disturb them. That is our deliverance. That is our salvation. It's not, we get somebody who's going to come in and he's going to save the day. And I think, many thought even Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he was going to make the world all peaceful. Jesus was a wonderful, wonderful person. You can think he was the Son of God or not. But it's very difficult to improve on the Sermon on the Mount. And as good and noble as it was, it really hasn't stopped a single death. Where he delivered that sermon, it's more bloodstained than any other place. That's not to criticize Jesus. Say we have to think institutionally. And I understand it's less exciting than to think about an individual personality will drop from the sky and save us all. We have to save ourselves. That's the greatest security we have.
Thank you so much. Very, very wise words, Bruce. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. See you soon. Thanks. Thanks,
Bye,
Jeffrey.
Bruce.
Okay.